ABA ROLI does many great things around the world. Rob's talked about some of them. And of course, globally, advancing women's rights and the role of women is of particular importance. For example, and we've just read about it in the newspaper. Actually, we talked about it at our meeting today. Arthur brought it up again. And that is what happened just a few days ago in Saudi Arabia, where Sharia law forbids women for driving. A man can get a ticket and pay a couple dollars. A woman was sentenced to 10 lashes. Amazing, 10 lashes for driving a car. Now, the good news is the Saudi king commuted that sentence, but the story and that possibility highlights that we have a lot of work left to do around the world. You know, of course, it goes without saying that women are the linchpin of creating sustainable and equitable development. No question about that, right? And we always hear the statement, it takes a village, right? It takes a village to raise a child. Well, who in that village do you think are raising those children? The women. And we have to make sure that they get all the support they can possibly get from us. And for that reason, we will continue to do what ABA ROLI does so well, and that is to provide support and justice for those people. A person who symbolizes that justice is the person we're here to honor tonight. President Bachelet is a champion both of the rule of law and of women's rights. The Rule of Law Award has been given by the ABA since 1994 to lawyers, judges, organizations, and other champions that have performed exceptional work that have advanced the rule of law. Some awardees have been recognized for their work to establish an independent legal system, or to ensure access to justice, or the proper functioning of the justice system. Other awardees have been recognized for their work to ensure protection of individual rights and to address ethnic tensions, or to frankly just build a better society. Past award winners have included Václav Havel, President of the Czech Republic, former Chief Justice Hilario Davide of the Philippine Supreme Court, the lawyers and judges of Pakistan. And I remember being with a number of judges from Pakistan at a World Justice Project meeting, and I happened to be sitting next to one of them, and they gave me a copy of their laws of that year, and he had dog-eared a particular part of the laws, which is about this big, and it talked about the importance of the ABA and ROLI in making sure that when lawyers and ties like us and judges were taken off the bench, that we spoke out strongly about the importance of the rule of law, and that without our support, they could not have gone back to the bench. I think that's just a small illustration of how important the activities we do are to many people around the world. The Zimbabwe Lawyers for Human Rights received an award, and of course, most of us were here last year honoring both Justice O'Connor and Arthur Chaskelson, the former Chief Justice of South Africa. President Bachelet obviously needs little introduction, but that's not going to stop me from introducing her. While I invite you to read more about her work in the program, and all of you received a program, and if not, there are more programs outside as you walk out, and you should take the opportunity to read all the wonderful things this amazing woman has done. But I want to acknowledge just a few of the important initiatives that she undertook as president of Chile. These efforts not only benefited that nation's women, but they also strengthened the rule of law in that country. But it also strengthens the rule of law around the world. When you do something in your country that is seen as a model for the rest of the world, the impact on that does not stop at your borders. It continues everywhere, and we're so grateful to you for all you have done. Now, under her leadership, to just mention a few things, she ensured that men and women who did the same job received equal salaries. Doesn't that sound like a novel idea? It happens to be something that we truly appreciate. She drastically reformed the pension system, ensuring a base pension for all people, especially women. She assured women the right to breastfeed at work. She stiffened the penalties for men who failed to pay alimony. She established a domestic violence shelter for women and children, along with hundreds of nurseries around the nation. She allowed the admission of women to the Chilean Naval Academy. She leveled the playing field so that an equal number of men and women are now serving in top government jobs, including the cabinet. She also consolidated Chilean's judicial institutions, which helped strengthen the rule of law in Chile. We need you here, and we need to follow you. And the example that you have set for all of us. We are indeed grateful to you, and we are privileged to present you with this award. Please join me in thanking President Bachelet. The 2011 Rule of Law Award goes to a most deserving recipient. Thank you.
Good evening, and thank you. It's really a pleasure to address the American Bar Association, and I really want to thank Chair Steve Zack and, of course, also Mr. Rob Boone for extending this invitation, and thank you all and express my gratitude. And I'm deeply honored to receive the 2011 Rule of Law Award on behalf of things we did and done because we believe it's the right thing to do. But also on behalf of UN Women, because we have been working on women's rights and will continue working, and we know that we have partners here in this room. It's an honor, and it makes me even more committed to human rights, to women's rights, and the rule of law. Today, I would like to share with you and briefly describe UN Women, what I hope to accomplish as the first head of this new UN agency, and why the rule of law is so important to our success and to meeting the aspiration of women around the world. In July 2010, after 4 years of negotiation, the 193 at that time member states of UN took a resolution to create a new entity because of there was, in the past, 4 different entities working on women's issues, but they were fragmented, and they needed sort of to scale up their efforts, to give it a bigger relevance, and consider that women's rights were as important as other global issues. And it was an historic step made by the UN member state to accelerate gender equality and women's empowerment. And UN Women, as a global champion for women and girls, we are dedicated to accelerating progress on meeting their needs worldwide and supporting countries to meet their commitments to women. These commitments are articulated in numerous global agreements, including the Convention on the elimination of all forms of discrimination against women, that is zero, the platform for action that arose from the Beijing Fourth World Conference on Women, the Millennium Declaration that sets out a framework for international development cooperation, and the Security Council Resolution 1325 and subsequent resolutions on women, peace, and security. And to make concrete progress, UN Women has identified 5 strategic areas on which we will take the lead, namely strengthening women's leadership and participation, enhancing women's economic empowerment, ending violence against women and girls, integrating gender equality into all aspects of national planning and budgeting, and incorporating women and women's rights into all peace and post-conflict processes. Of course, we'll be working on many other issues, education, migration, and so on, but there are other UN entities who do have that specific mandate, so we will be building partnerships with them. Now, all of these areas involve women's access to justice and strengthening the rule of law. As the UN Secretary General has stated, the rule of law is at the very heart of the United Nations mission. That is why earlier this year, for our first major report at UN Women, we chose to focus on women's access to justice. This stems from the recognition that laws and justice systems that work well are the foundation for social justice and gender equality. We found that all over the world, remarkable transformations have taken place over the past 3 decades in legal frameworks that advance gender equality. As an example, a total of 186 countries have ratified the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. 115 countries guarantee women equal property rights, and at least 43 have adopted election law quotas to increase women's representation in national parliaments. In our comprehensive review of legislation, we found that 125 countries have laws against domestic violence, which is an extraordinary shift even from 10 years ago. This shift is important not only because of the protection it affords women, but also because it signals a willingness on the part of governments to regulate the private sphere as well as the public domain. But we also found that although the rule of law is a cherished principle and a cornerstone of democratic governance worldwide, in too many countries still, the rule of law rules women out. Laws that discriminate against women are found in every region, and even where the laws are gender equitable, there are vast implementation gaps. Meanwhile, the institution of justice, the police, the courts, and the legal aid system too often fail to meet women's needs. One thing is certain: ensuring equal access to justice for women and men must begin with ensuring that the laws themselves treat women and men equally and fairly. And this means 3 things, at least 3 things. First, that the concerns that women face are addressed within the legal framework. Issues such as domestic work or violence against women have been viewed as private issues and have until recently been absent from the legal framework. Second, that there are mechanisms to implement laws in an equitable way for women. We have learned, for example, that it's not enough to legislate that women and men have equal access to land and property, because without legal aid, without joint titling programs, efforts to support gender equality through legal reform have often had disappointing outcomes. And third, that lawmakers and judicial officials are mindful about the impact of the law on gender equality and women's rights. Because sometimes laws that attempt to provide greater protection can make women more vulnerable. Laws that criminalize transmission of HIV and AIDS, for instance, might end up penalizing a woman who was unknowingly infected by a partner, who cannot afford to be tested, and who unknowingly transmits the virus to another person. Fundamentally, the rule of law depends on access to justice. And here, I have to say that the record is uneven. In many places, women do not know their rights, and I think the video was so clear about that. They depend in many places on male relatives for assistance and resources. They are afraid to report violence, fearing retribution from relatives or partners, neighbors, strangers, or public officials. Many cannot reach the courts because they're too far away, or because the costs are so high, or because they cannot leave their children. Even if a good judgment is obtained, it may not be enforced, making the situation even worse. But there are a number of ways in which these obstacles are being overcome, which I would like to share with you tonight. We have found that one of the most effective ways to improve women's access to justice is to increase women's visible presence and leadership across the justice system. When women are the police, court officials, prosecutors, investigators, judges, and legal aid providers, it not only creates more representative institutions, it has a profound impact on outcomes. Let me give you some examples. I'm not talking theoretically. I'm talking what we have seen on the ground. For example, more women officers in police stations results in a higher rate of women reporting sexual assault. In Liberia, the all-women Indian-formed police unit, which has been part of the peacekeeping operation there since 2007, has generated increased reporting of crimes against women and has also boosted local recruitment of young women into the police force. And I have to add, as former Minister of Defense, when you want to empower women, because what you saw in the video when they explained that for them, women were citizens of a second class. So rape was something like normal to do. It was not something important. So we need to empower women. And one of the things that is very important when you see peacekeepers, female peacekeepers unit, police unit or army unit or whatever, it gives also the sense of women that women can be powerful. So that's why we are trying to incentivize countries to send more female units to the different conflict or post-conflict countries. Whether as police or judges, as parliamentarians or activists, women can play a critical role in driving the change we need to see. In those countries that have seen large increases in women's representation in political decision-making, progressive laws on labor rights, health care, and property often follow. Women have demanded change in laws that discriminate against them, shaping new laws and policies to drive forward positive change. The second key means of improving women's access to justice, I said the first was a bigger presence of women in all the different levels of the justice system. The second are institutional innovations designed to overcome the specific obstacles that women face. And one important example, and a very positive example, is the creation of the so-called one-stop shops that gather all the necessary services of the judicial process in one place. And there are many examples in the developed world, but also in South Africa, dealing with domestic violence. The fewer steps a woman has to take, the more likely she is to pursue justice. One-stop shops have been used in a number of countries and are proving to be a low-cost approach to reducing the attrition in the justice chain. Laws and implementation matter, but so does the delivery of justice. The rule of law requires that the police and the courts apply the law fairly and without bias. And this has been possible through the use of mobile courts. We just saw this fantastic video, but I had it before knowing I was going to see the video, which, as many of you know, have been used in Indonesia and Haiti in the aftermath of humanitarian disasters, in India and China to access remote rural areas because they can deliver justice rapidly and with limited resources. And as we just saw in the video, the work that the ABA Rule of Law Initiative have been doing there in Kindu, but also early this year, there was a very important work done that secured an important conviction for crimes against humanity. And the case was, I don't know if the same case, because it's in Fiji this year. You know, in New Year's Day in Fiji, Eastern Congo, more than 40 women and girls were raped. And just 6 weeks later, this mobile court convicted, probably is the same case, 9 soldiers of these horrible crimes, meeting standards to due process and delivering justice with unprecedented speed. So really, it's a fantastic work what you're doing there. So yes, let's give an applause to the initiative. But equally important is the need to engage with sites of informal justice. For people in many developing countries, especially women, customary systems remain the only ones available. Yes, they are often not less accessible than formal justice systems. They may exclude women from decision-making and reinforce cultural norms of gender inequality. Transforming informal justice system is therefore of vital importance. It is also important to note that tradition and customs are not static, that they are constantly evolving to meet new needs and challenges. In Nepal, for example, UN Women partner with the UN Developed Program to set up committees of women paralegals to provide alternatives to traditional systems for women in remote communities, particularly conflict resolution services. On a recent visit by UN staff, the women in one community, some of whom walked 2 hours for the meeting, reported that the traditional leaders were, and I quote, closing down business, as people brought more and more cases to the women paralegals. This paralegal group has established trust through their fair judgments and were changing perceptions of justice in their community. And I happened to see in Liberia, when I visited there, in a rural area, there was this, I don't remember the exact local name, there was this system where it was a main thing that they brought people to the justice as a tradition justice, and they sort of define when those people needed to go to the more formal justice or where there was something that they could solve between neighbors and things like that. But in that particular place, now women, using the whole tradition, were dealing with a lot of issues like domestic violence. They were doing sort of a trial, but in terms of analyzing what the case was, and then if the case was really a crime, they would send it to the jail, to the police, and to the judiciary system. Otherwise, they will find and negotiate between the parties to find a solution. So women are also taking part in some of those, I would say, traditional justice system. But this leads me to another issue I would talk about briefly, that of the rule of law in post-conflict societies. In the wake of a conflict, states face the formidable task of dealing with crimes committed during the conflict and also paving the path to reconciliation, reconstruction, and justice. In this regard, the International Criminal Court has made many gains, not the least of which is the existence of architecture for international justice that recognizes sexual violence crimes as war crimes, crimes against humanity, and possibly genocide. Together with the International Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia and the International Tribunal for Rwanda, these institutions have indicted and prosecuted perpetrators of these crimes against women. Today, in countries in every region, women are demanding justice. They are demanding reparations, a seat at the peacemaking table, full participation in drafting a new constitution, or in representation in parliament and government position, in planning their nation's futures during reconstruction and transition, so their views and their perspectives can inform new institutions, laws, and policies. As we witness people around the world, from Tahrir Square to Tunis, make increasing claims on the government for justice and human rights, women are uniting and demanding that their voices be heard and their rights protected. Earlier this year, I traveled to Egypt, and I joined also colleagues in Tunisia for consultations to advance women's leadership and rights in democratic transitions. In April of this year, the political reformers of Tunisia achieved what had been unthinkable only months earlier, a draft electoral law calling for full parity in the political representation of the new Tunisian democracy. In Egypt, they have articulated the Egyptian Women's Charter, calling for the greater representation of women in government, in drafting the constitution, in running for public office, in ministries, in justice, in parliament, and also demanding the revision of discriminatory legislation, and in particular, the reform of family law, and also they are demanding a strong Department of Women and Equality in the government. From my own experience in Chile, I know that these transitions are pathways rather than a single path. The processes of democratization and the institution of the rule of law are a unique moment for mending broken ties within communities, shaping institutions, and projecting the desired future for the country in the coming decades. And I would like to stress that women's struggle to achieve a greater voice in political leadership is not just about advancing the rights of women. It is about achieving better outcomes for all the citizens. So in summarizing my remarks, let me say first, and this I think you will find funny that I mention it, but I will explain it. I will say first that law matters, and I think this is a strange place to say that laws matter. But I mean not only by its own merit, but also because it generates other consequences. And let me explain. Laws matters because where there are domestic violence laws, for instance, prevalence is lower and fewer people think that violence against women are justified. Where there are laws to protect women's access to land, or their divorce and inheritance rights, women are now claiming these rights. Second, laws matter, yes, but implementation also matters. It's no use having good laws if they are not implemented or enforced. Clear mandates and procedures are needed to instruct public service providers to implement the law, and funding for the law and the funding that will permit to implement it for implementation and monitoring is essential. And third, of course, the infrastructure of justice matters. Courts and the justice system provide a vital accountability mechanism for women. And finally, of course, women's empowerment and leadership matter. Where women's voices are heard and their demands are heeded, the rule of law stands a better chance of being deeply rooted within society and institutionalized to deliver justice. So in closing, I would like to invite all of you to join me and other UN partners to support women's access to justice and to help women to use the law and international human rights instruments to strengthen the rule of law in countries around the world. So I really want to thank you very much for all that you do. Thank you very much.